Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second episode of Zap Chat. I am your host, Zach Probst. Now, this is a pretty big thing to do here. I just now getting comfortable of doing more episodes. I've written down a lot more notes this time. Since my first episode was very random, it's not exactly my best work. So I'm really hoping that this episode I can really shine a better light to you guys. So I've really gone deeper, and I've really gotten to read more information about getting it going. So today's topic, we have Sega. So this is an awesome topic I want to discuss with you guys. Let's see. Sega is a video game company, of course. And since I was born in the 90s, I was born right about the time where Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis were heavily competing each other. So there were a lot of battlings and which of them has the best sales and which third-party games are the best versions compared the two. So there has been a lot of heavy competitors, including some other game companies which nobody knows anymore. But Nintendo is the biggest video game company of all time. It was the biggest height of everyone else. And Sega was the one that they're like the second end of competing. But Nintendo is always the number one thing, which is kind of sad because Sega deserves better in some way. Sega has been achieving some really good games. For example, Sonic the Hedgehog. If that game hadn't come out on the Sega Genesis, then Sega would probably lose a lot of money for the console that they developed. And this Sega Genesis is their second console that they've been developing. I've only played a little bit of the Sega Genesis. I was way too young to play around with the consoles, because I was only a toddler when that happened. I was only a baby. But as I got older, my friend of mine named Austin, we grew up being just friends when we were kids, and he owned a Sega Genesis. I was able to play around with the games that he owns. I played, I think, Sonic the Hedgehog 2 and Disney's Aladdin. Those are the two games that I remembered a lot playing as a kid. Sorry, my throat has been kind of a little dry lately because I'm recording it during the summer. So as you're recording this, it's recording from, let's see, July 16th, 2019. So right now it's been a pretty odd weather for this year. Last year was like a disaster. We've been getting brutal hot temperatures the whole summer, and we had that really bad smoke debris that hit in our hometown. So we couldn't go outside as much, but our throat was just just gross. So I hated going outside. So today, and this year of today's weather, it's definitely not as bad as before, and we've been getting a lot more rain than last year, which is nice because it's a nice change of pace for just to have a nice wet day, and so that way you don't have to waste money on watering the plants, your little gardener, and your little garden, and just saving money. So for a while you're gonna be hearing my throat just kind of a little itchy and scratchy here and there. So I am drinking tea, a very sugary tea. So that'll be the cleansing palette of my throat. So just want to let you guys know that I might edit little tweaks here and there just so You don't hear me going for the whole cut of the scene, so that just be embarrassing, and so you won't be hearing that a whole lot in this. So that's going to be cut out just so you don't get grossed out, going like, "Ew, Zach, what's wrong with you?" So I won't have that in the show. So, anyways, back to the topic: Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo, both heavily competitors, and for a while, Sega was pretty big at the time, and even Super Nintendo, two biggest consoles at the time. And in Japan, there were a lot bigger success than here in America. And then it became a big multi-million selling game franchise that's ever produced. So not only we got Sonic the Hedgehog, but other games such as Total War and the Yakuza, which are the big titles from Sega. They are also the world's most prolific arcade game that they've produced. So I have played a bunch of some of the arcade games that Sega made, and oh man, there's I remember there's this driving game called Sega Super GT, and that was a lot of fun. I've always loved the graphics, and you can sit down in the chair and with the steering wheel with the gear and the gas pedal and the brakes, and it's it was such an amazing thing. There were a lot of consoles, like arcade machines, that they were just messing around a lot, and a lot of kids playing the arcade machines, and then the games playing at home, and all that fun stuff in the 90s was the best times. And I wish I was born in the early 80s just so I can just remembered of how great times, like great memories and times I've had. Except of my childhood, I got bullied every day at school, which is a different story. But on the bright side, we get to have tons and tons of video games. And I'm super happy that I got to live in the 90s with such really great, really great times. Let's see here. As I said, I wrote down a bunch of notes just so I can keep track and have discussions with you guys. And feel free to write down in the comments below of what was your fun memory back in the day with all the Sega Genesis you had, or even the Sega Saturn or the Sega Dreamcast. You know, just feel free to talk about it and what you liked about it. And feel free to write it down in the comments below. I would love to hear your guys' opinions, because that's what the show is about, is sharing thoughts and opinions with nothing political or not even Trump to talk about. This is a discussion about entertainment purposes only. And so that's what we're here for, so you can get away from drama and suspense. So when you're here with me of my show, you're here to have a good time. I'm here to have a good time. And so if we're talking about Sega, this is what we're doing. We're going to talk about Sega. And we're also going to be discussing some anime later on in the show. So be sure to tune in for that. Let's see. Oh, yes. Now, with the developing game consoles, there has been some creativity and business decisions that they had a difficult time to develop. With Nintendo being just as big as Sega, they sometimes had a rough time, but with Sonic the Hedgehog, it really helped boosting the sales. So Sega Genesis had a chance to push forward for other game developments, which is nice. And then later in time, we got to have a Sega Saturn, which focuses more of a CD games. But before that, we did had other systems, such as, even though we did had some of the downside of the sales. So let me check something real quick. I got this computer right here. I can look it up real quick. Oh yeah, so I'm reading this website here to share with you guys. but I'm not really sure if I'm allowed to say which website I'm at. But I just want to read it, what I'm reading on my computer right now. So as it reads right here, Sega had commercial failures in the second half of the decade with the 32X, Saturn, and Dreamcast. As Sega's market strategy changed and console newcomer, Sony became dominant with the PlayStation. So for the Sony developing their own game console for the PlayStation, that hurt a lot on the sale for future games of the Sega Saturn. Now, sadly, the pixels of the Sega Saturn wasn't as pleasant as the original PlayStation system, which is sad because I really wanted the Saturn to move forward. And I was very young at the time, too. I think that one came out like, oh man, was it like 95, 96? And that's going to bother me not knowing, so I got to at least look real quick and see what year did it first came out. Let's see here. Oh, here it is. In America, it came out in May 11th, 1995. So I was, only a couple years old when that came out. And I never owned a Sega Saturn because I grew up poor. I grew up very poor. My parents were just keeping me around to keep me happy and humble. So I'm grateful for that. But as I got older, and yes, I have played the original Nintendo Entertainment System. Yes, I used to own that. And I never owned the Super Nintendo, which is fine because, when you're only a toddler, you don't understand games. So there's no point of owning a Super Nintendo. But I did own a original PlayStation because, like everything else, the original PlayStation had a bigger hit than the Sega Saturn. So sadly for the Sega Saturn, it did not do too well, and I was a little sad that I did not know that the Sega Saturn had some really great game titles. I kind of looked it up a while back, and I was like, oh man, they had some really great titles. I think they should have come out with the other game consoles, but since Sega was competing with other companies, it wasn't that easy. So they were just doing their own thing. But I did find out one more thing. Quite recently, I've heard that the Nintendo Switch is coming out what used to be that's only this on the Sega Saturn and the original Xbox, called Panzer Dragoon. I was like, oh my god, Nintendo Switch got a hold of Panzer Dragoon so you can play it on your Nintendo Switch? What? That's amazing. I would love to play that game. I would so love to play that game so much. I've only owned the original Xbox Panzer Dragoon. That is the only one I have, and I've only played just a little bit of it. I just bought the game, it was like back in the holidays, I think, and I just been playing a little bit of here and there, but I don't really have the time to play that game because I want to play the newer games, such as Spider-Man for the PlayStation 4 I want to play, and the new Tomb Raider that came out, and I really want to play Shenmue on the PlayStation 4, and which we'll talk more about that later in the show. But yeah, I was really relieved that we can finally have Panzer Dragoon to play. That none of the kids in today's world, nobody really knows what that game is. I was watching some of the people's reactions, and nobody know what Panzer Dragoon is, which is sad. But I'm happy that they're bringing the title back, so the younger audience would love to check this game out, because Panzer Dragoon is actually one of the best RPG games that Sega has ever produced. Seriously, it is a very, very fun game. But one of them, if you're trying to get it to own on a Sega Saturn, like Panzer Dragoon 1 and 2 are worth a couple $100, but the Sega Saturn for what was it? Panzer Dragoon Saga is worth, like, in a complete, was it a fully complete manual book and case intact, all the discs, like all 4 discs are complete, will cost you about more than $1,000, which is crazy for just that one game. When that game first came out on Sega Saturn, it did cost about closer to $100, which I'm certain back then, like, are you kidding me? I ain't paying that much for just one game. But in today's world, it's worth even more now because there aren't that many games out there. It's crazy. So for discussing a little bit about PlayStation, Sega was losing more money because Sony made the PlayStation and they're making tons of money. And so the Sega Saturn failed, didn't have that many games, and some of the titles kind of like, it's not so great in here and there. But for the PlayStation, it had a much better gameplay experience than a Sega Saturn. And it made tons of money and came out like close to, gosh, I think they produced about like 1,000 games or something like that. But they made a lot. I was really surprised that they made tons and tons of the PS1 games. But man, yeah, I remember I owned quite a bit of PS1 games. Not as much like owning like 50 or 100. No, nothing like that. Mostly owning about, like, say maybe 10 or 20 games. Now, again, none of my parents had that kind of money to be buying games left and right like crazy. The only thing that I played a lot was actually PC games. Back when I was a kid, I played a lot of PC games. At that time, as a kid, it was a lot more fun to play around than playing game consoles. Because game consoles back in the day, they're just not as powerful, and it can easily get broken or breaking down, or it doesn't work anymore, and it has some technical errors and bugs. So all that stuff, it just wasn't as powerful as a regular computer. And so for owning the PlayStation, and I also own the Nintendo 64, which is, at that time, it was top of the line. We never seen a game console that plays 3D games on a cartridge game. It was new and exciting. Kids went nuts. I also went crazy for this system. And I used to own a lot of N64 games because I love that system. And even the original PlayStation, I played a lot on that as well. I didn't really own a lot of PS1. I mostly owned, let's see, I can't really think on top of my head, but I rented a bunch of PS1 games. Oh man, I've rented so many PS1 games at the places like the Hollywood Video, where you may find this funny for you guys, but you have to go into a video store, go in, find your movie or your games, and just rent a game you can keep for about 5 days, and make sure you return it before then, and so you don't have to pay any fees. If you leave it at your home for about a month, there is a fee. And for the store like Hollywood Video, right next door, you can go in a game like in this game area, which is called Game Crazy, which is a lot more fun to check out. They got so many merchandise on controllers and a bunch of games and different systems. It was an amazing place to check out, and you can even play a bunch of games to demo, and just basically just hang out and just play demo games, which is so much fun back in the day. And I miss that. I really, really miss that. I really wish they can have, well, they kind of did. I just wish they kind of bring back a retro game store that has doing more merchandises of those. Nowadays, it's everything digital, and it can also sometimes hurt business. If you're putting everything to be digital, it can sometimes hurt of other businesses. Yeah, that's a difficult thing. So for everything that I remembered as a kid, it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed of all the games I played as a kid, and I also hate going to school every day, and all I want is to go home and play games all day, and even watching movies all day, watching my favorite cartoon shows every day, even Saturday morning cartoons. Oh my God, those were big. Those were big. Those were amazing. We'll discuss that more later on. We'll discuss more like cartoon shows, like Saturday morning cartoon shows. But yeah. Sorry, I'm just kind of having a thinking thought going like, ooh, that'll be a good episode. That'll be a future episode, Saturday morning cartoons. Maybe I will consider that. And so as time goes by, PlayStation took over, and the Nintendo 64 was also there. And then we start to have the Sega Dreamcast. The Sega Dreamcast, I used to own it when I was a kid too. I remember owning one. Not as many games. I couldn't find many games that I wanted to get for the Dreamcast. Because when I went to Game Crazy, I was just kind of looking around at a bunch of the titles, and as a kid, it'd be like, I don't know any of those titles. I don't know any of those. Because it was brand new at the time, and I felt lost. Because I don't know any of the titles. Which hurts the sales, once again, of Sega. The Sega Dreamcast was losing more sales. But when I started thinking back, I remember watching the commercials back in the day. Those commercials were weird, but man, you get to see a bunch of the characters that's made from Sega. You can see a bunch of sports players and Crazy Taxi, Sonic the Hedgehog, Caution Seaman, which is a really trippy, weird game. But yeah, you can see a bunch of characters just hanging out, having a good time at this DJ club, and Sonic is the DJ. It was a really crazy video, and I just started watching some of the YouTube today, and I was looking at these commercials, and I started watching even earlier ones for the Sega Genesis, and I remember watching some of those commercials as a kid. I definitely remembered the one commercial when I was a kid. I remember watching this one commercial. It was it was shot very cinematic. It was showing a helicopter landing on the ground, and it shows a person on, I don't know what you call it exactly, but being wheeled to the hospital, and see a man completely injured and in a lot of pain. And as they go in, there's some sort of creature coming out of his stomach, like in the movie Alien. Like his stomach just gets bigger and bigger, and all the doctors like, what the heck is that? And the guy starts screaming, and then they showed the gameplay footage, and I was like, is that Mortal Kombat? And all of a sudden, boom, Mortal Kombat 3. I'm like, oh my God, that's a weird commercial. But as a kid, I was so intrigued with the commercial. They don't really tell you much. And the funny thing is, back in the day, when they were promoting the game, as an adult, you're probably thinking, what's the point of this Mortal Kombat commercial of this? And it's a lot like how Japan does it. Let's say a random guy having a piece of chewing gum, and he starts chewing, then it gets lifted by this ginormous cat just walking around the whole Tokyo, Japan, just going places. I was like, what's the point of this big-ass cat of this chewing gum commercial? So it's a lot like for the video games. There was a lot of those. And even Japan had some weird commercials as well. But some of the commercials were pretty good. And I really wish America and Japan kind of going like, ooh, we might have something in common to each other. So it is a really weird time, especially with those commercials. It was a really weird time. But as a kid, you don't care. You're just enjoying the commercials. the commercials back in the day are just funny, wacky, fun, exciting, gets you pumped, and it just makes you want to buy something. That's just how it was back in the day. Now, for as time goes by, the Dreamcast has been losing more sales, and they made a decision that Dreamcast, they're going to discontinue the game system, and Sega has announced that they're no longer developing any more game consoles. So they're focusing now as third-party games. So they've made some couple of games that Sega, that they were going to come out with more games on a Dreamcast, but later been deciding that they talked to of other gaming companies like Nintendo and PlayStation and Xbox, which was a big thing. Also, when Dreamcast was trying to sell more games, what they were losing was because Sony was coming out with the PlayStation 2 system, which was huge. And what the difference is of that one and the excitement is because the PS2 was a lot more powerful and the graphics are better than the Dreamcast. Back in the day, I kid you not, you can watch DVD movies on your PlayStation 2, which back then, that was a really big deal because some of the DVD players are pretty expensive. So if you can achieve those three big things, not only play the original PlayStation, but you can also watch DVD movies. And we definitely bought it, and I had to make a deal with my relative. His name is Don. He is known as my godfather. Long story short, my dad and Don have been best friends since they were kids. So they've been around for a long, long time. And Don has been our roommate for years. And I grew up with him a lot. Most of my influence was Don. Don got me introduced me to playing a whole bunch of games. So he is my go-to guy when I'm playing games. And he loves playing retro games, especially PC. He's more of a PC gamer than a console gamer. Like, oh yeah, he's a real hardcore PC gamer all the way through. So much, I think he still plays some PC games, but not as much as before because of work, and he has to keep the business going here and there. So it's tough. But back then, oh man, those were good times with Don. I had a blast of hanging out with him, going places, playing games, and watching movies together. Oh man, it was a blast. So what Don and I made an agreement was this. Don and I had agreement in saying that, okay, if you're going to purchase a PlayStation 2, you're going to have to sell the PS1 console, the Nintendo 64, including all the games, and also the Sega Dreamcast and all the games in order to get the PlayStation 2. Because back then, the PS2 cost about, was it $200 to $300 to own the PS2 system. So I had some thought about it, and I made an agreement. And I know some of you guys are thinking, was it worth it of selling all of your games, your bunch of game consoles, including the games you own? Was it worth it of selling all that stuff? My answer is this. At that time, yes, because the PS2 was like the biggest thing of all, and it made huge sales. And as a kid, I didn't really care. I was like, oh my god, this is the greatest game console of all time. Thank you so much. I was just happy that I got to play like the next generation game console. But right now, as I thought about it, I did regret selling the Sega, not Genesis, the Sega Dreamcast. That's the one thing I regret getting rid of. The N64, I can probably get away with, but I wish I never sold my Sega Dreamcast. I wish I should have kept that one because I did not realize of how many games that are really good. And I've only owned maybe like a handful of titles. I can't really remember, but I remember renting a lot of them. I know that for the games I remembered playing as a kid, the biggest one I love is, which I also play the arcade games. It's called Hydro Thunder, which is basically a boat race game. And it's by far one of my favorite racing games I've ever played. It is so much fun, it's exciting, and you have to compete, really focus on winning first place because those boats are fast. And oh my gosh, it's so much fun. They even had an arcade machine for playing Hydro Thunder. Hydro Thunder used to be owned by Midway, which is also another big time game company, which is what they also known back in the day. They were pretty big in the arcade games as well, including Mortal Kombat was a really big one for Midway. For Mortal Kombat, that's their baby. That's their baby until Warner Brothers went in and bought Mortal Kombat, which I'm completely okay with that. It is kind of tough to accept that some other company wants to purchase your game, but back in the day, Midway went out of business back in 2009, so Midway had to sell all of their biggest franchises, and so for Warner Brothers, they bought Mortal Kombat, which brings up an idea going like, oh, okay, that's a good idea. So that brings up something in the lines of they just announced a while back that there's going to be a brand new Mortal Kombat movie. It's produced by James Wan, which is the guy that did. He directed the DC Comics for Aquaman, and he produced Swamp Thing for the DC Universe series, and he did Fast and Furious 7, and he was hugely known for doing a horror flick called Saw, which he was heavily involved in making those franchise. But he only did the earlier ones, and after that he moved on to something else. So for James Wan involved in producing Mortal Kombat, that's pretty big. And they just announced an actor for playing Sub-Zero. And I can't remember the name of the actor, but he was known for the movie he did back in the day called The Raids, which is a heist building that the SWAT team was going in and to take down the enemies. And it's a foreign film, but it's good. It is a good movie. So if you guys haven't known The Raids, please go search it and check it out, because that is a damn good movie. Great action, really suspense, and bloody too. It is a very bloody movie, but man, it is good. So getting back to the game consoles, for the longest time, Sega has been really, really difficult to making money on of their games. So after the failure of Dreamcast, they've just been focusing on third-party games. If I can think on top of my head, there would be games like Panzer Dragoon or Orta, I think so. I don't know how to pronounce that. It went straight to the original Xbox, and also Shenmue 2, which was another huge game for the Sega Dreamcast. Shenmue was a really big game in the system, because back in the day, with Panzer Dragoon, like the top 10, the most popular RPG game of all time, Shenmue was the most popular game, open world RPG game of the Sega Dreamcast. It was the best one of all. And now, sadly, it didn't really sell that much. I think it couldn't reach their goal of how much money that they were expecting to make. But that game was expensive to produce. I've heard it was a really expensive to develop this game because it's such an open world gaming experience, which there aren't that many games out there that does that, which is amazing. Now, unfortunately, as a kid, I don't know anything about RPGs, and I'm terrible at it. I'm never good at it, and I'm always lost, and I don't get the point. And what's the story about? I was very picky. I just want easygoing games, which is why I love arcade games so much. There's no plot. There's no plot story, just action. Nothing but action. So that's what I love about arcade machines so much, especially with Sega. Sega knows what they're doing on the arcade machines. And so for the third-party games, they came out with Shenmue, not the first one, but they were able to get Shenmue 2, which is the sequel, to come out with the original Xbox. And I also own the copy of that as well. And the cool thing they did that was, if you're unable to play the first game on the Sega Dreamcast, you open up the case and it gives you a DVD disc. They took all the gameplay footage of the first game and made it into a hour-and-a-half long movie, which is a very smart thing to do. So in order for you to get caught up of the story plot, you get to watch this movie before playing the second Shenmue game. And I watched a little bit of it, and I love the idea. It gets you going. I'm like, wow, I like this idea. And I still have it with me too, so it's a nice treat to have it in my collection. For other games, we got Gun Valkyrie, which was an okay game. I'm a bit rusty of what the story plot is exactly. I've only played a little bit. The controls of the game is very difficult. It's something you're gonna have to get used to and practice all day. But yeah, it's not an easy one. Let's see, what other third-party games on top of my head? I'm trying to hurry and think. What was it? Oh, I know. Crazy Taxi 3. That was another one. I own that one as well, and it is a wacky game. I love Crazy Taxi so much. I also played... oh, yeah, that was another big thing. Crazy Taxi is owned by Sega. So Sega developed this arcade machine to play Crazy Taxi, and the arcade machine is amazing. I love Crazy Taxi so much. It's difficult, but it's fun and entertaining. And oh man, I always thought the arcade machine was so much fun. I remember that you have to stand up and drive. Oops, I hit the microphone. My bad. I remember that you have to stand up and steer the game, and the gas and brake pedal. It's really difficult to use the gas and brake pedal while you're standing up. As a kid, in my opinion, it was tough. But at the same time, you don't really care because you're just having the time of your life because it is such a great game. And when I got to play it on the Sega Dreamcast, it was even a same experience. For those of you who don't know, the Sega Dreamcast is supposed to have the exact same gameplay experience as the arcade machines. So it works exactly the same thing. And for playing Crazy Taxi, the gameplay experience looks exactly the same. And I love that. So I was like, I want to own Crazy Taxi on my Dreamcast. So it was a very fun thing to have. And I remember I loved it so much. I just wish I'm still thinking back, like, man, I wish I still kept it. But yeah, I love the Dreamcast so much, and I loved what Sega was doing. I just wish they would do more of the game consoles. I really missed them because a bunch of the kids nowadays don't know what Sega is, which is it breaks my heart because I really want Sega to be known very much. Until, which brings up a really awesome announcement a couple of months back. Uh, Sega has announced that they're going to bring back the classic, such as the Sega Genesis, a lot like how Nintendo did. They came out with a Nintendo Classic Mini system and a Super Nintendo Classic Mini system. Now, Sega is doing their own, and Sega's doing big too. They're doing all the way through. Sega Genesis Classic Mini. I believe that's what they're called. Sega Genesis Classic Mini. And this is something I've been really wanting to own in my collection. You get to play about around 40 to 50 games, and a lot of them are licensed games, such as Streets of Rage, Castlevania Bloodlines, which is a very expensive game to own. And yes, you can own a bunch of Sonic the Hedgehog games. And I can't remember the list, but there were about there were roughly about 40 to 50 games, and great titles too. They put a lot of effort on putting the greatest hits into the Classic Mini. So I'm really happy for what Sega is doing. It's going to come out in September, sometime in mid-September. So I would be ready. I would be more than happy to own it. It's going to be amazing, and you can use other USB controllers. It'll be plugged in as a USB. So I believe you can use your own personal controllers to mess around. And I think it's exciting. I can't wait for it to come out. Now, my last topic is about the live-action movie Sonic the Hedgehog. Now, I know I've heard everything about this. I've been keeping post about the whole disastrous on the look of the trailer. The design of Sonic the Hedgehog is a disaster. I really did not like the look of it. He looks creepy. His face structure is wrong, and he's not supposed to have human teeth either, which I get it. It's supposed to be live action, but he looks ugly. And I'm sorry, I don't like being rude, but I can tell that this is a very bad decision. And apparently there were so many people that brought out the attention that gave the company going, okay, we basically just messed up our design, so we're going to go ahead and redo the character design from scratch and make it better. So I'm really happy about that. It was supposed to come out in November of 2019, but it's now been pushed back to, I believe it's like February 14th or February 20th of 2020. That gives them time to redesign the characters, or maybe just one character of Sonic the Hedgehog. We don't know if Tails is going to be in it. That might be too soon. I'm sure they might show more in the future, but as of right now, it's just Sonic, which I'm okay with. You know, I think they're just starting as a low-budget movie, basically, and just try just get it made. But I don't want to go too deep on the Sonic the Hedgehog, because right now, before I close down my podcast today, our last topic we're going to be discussing is anime. And the anime here we're going to be talking about, this is going to be the top 10 Hayao Miyazaki films. Now, this may surprise you on the list, because since I am a big fan of Hayao Miyazaki films, my list is going to be very different than everybody else. So, which you'll find out in this list here. And I'll be discussing just a little bit and tweak it here and there about what I like about this movie, and how much I've grown up, how much I love and continue of this movie, and I would watch it every single day, and why this movie is my number one favorite. So I will break it down just a little bit, but we're going to try to hurry up as we go. So I'm going to go ahead and read this list to you. So we're going to start with number 10, Kiki's Delivery Service. I never really got around watching it as a kid. I watched it later on. So I watched it about a couple years ago, and it was okay. The story plot was okay, about mostly a young girl who wants to become a popular witch, basically. But then as she starts living closer to this town, that she gets to live with the humans more instead of being a witch. So as she was living in a life of in the human world, she's starting to losing her powers, and there's trouble in town, and she can't use her powers anymore because it's fading away. So I didn't really grow up watching a whole lot, and that was pretty much all I remembered as from that movie. So it was in okay, so that's why it's in my number 10 list. Number 9, Nausicaa, The Valley of the Wind. I hope I pronounced that right. That movie is a lot of fun to watch. It had a lot of adventure. It's got some great casts, like the English dub casts, I should say. It's got some really good casts. Even got Patrick Stewart in the movie too, which is exciting. And it's been a long time since I've watched that one, and I'm gonna have to go back and rewatch it because I remember going like, oh, this is an okay movie. I kind of liked it, but that was a while back. I'm sure I might have a different opinion now, but I'm sure that this movie is a classic. Number 8, Ponyo. Ponyo is definitely a beautiful movie. I really love the animation of that one, and it focuses a more younger audience of this movie. And oh gosh, yeah, I can't remember the casting of the movie, but oh man, it is such a great movie and fantastic for young kids to watch. Absolutely for younger kids to watch. The animation, once again, Hayao Miyazaki did an incredible job of the look and tone of the movie. It is a must-watch, absolutely. Number 7, Castle in the Sky. Now this one I really enjoyed a lot. This is the movie I remember watching when I was younger. I was about, I was about in my middle school years. So I was like 6th or 7th grade when I first watched it. And I remember I loved it a lot. And I think that there's a lot of, oh my gosh, I felt bad for not remembering because it's such a long time. The story plot of this young boy helping a young girl, that the boy is like, hey, help us. And she's like, oh, no, run away from those guys, run away. So they start doing their own thing and go like, help us. And like, nope, that's bad people too. Let's go on a different adventure. So there was just a lot of that going on. You don't know who to trust. I hope that sounds right. Like I said, it was a long time since I've last watched it, but I know Castle in the Sky is a good movie. But once we get higher in the list, you'll see why I love the movie so much. So at number 7, and next up is number 6, Howl's Moving Castle. That movie I've only watched one time. Not that was a bad movie, but the story was going, well, they could have done better. I only wish that, for what I've heard, the novel book is better than the movie. That's what I've heard. And I didn't really know it was based on the book. I do know that Christian Bale is in the movie, and he played a very good-looking character, I should say. Well, overall, I really loved the story idea about a young girl that got bewitched as turning into an older lady and trying to the form back, being young again. And the visuals was once again stunning. I remember, I did remember the best part of the movie is Billy Crystal playing as the little fireball, and he put so much humor going on playing that part, and I loved it. Billy Crystal, applause to you. That is another favorite thing in the whole movie was that humor. I like that a lot. Number 5, My Neighbor Totoro. Now this movie, I grew up watching this. My Neighbor Totoro is one of the very first movies I've watched as a kid that made me become an anime fan. And there's that one and another one that I grew up watching as well, which is also another Hayao Miyazaki film. And you'll be hearing that in a very number one list. So stay tuned for that. So anyway, on My Neighbor Totoro, has been, it's definitely for younger audience to watch as well. And I remember I've watched a different type of English dub of it, but when you're a toddler or a baby, you don't understand what they're saying at all, but you understood the visual of what the story is about. And I've always loved this big, fluffy, rounded, somewhat a bear or a cat of some sort. But I loved that creature, just all fluffy and cute and cuddly. You just want to hug him. That's all. As a kid, I just want a bear hug. Just give him a good old hug. And it's just a lot of fun to watch. I really, really enjoyed it. I really, really hope that younger kids should watch this movie. My Neighbor Totoro is definitely the number one highly recommended movie to watch for younger kids. It's got an incredible story. You cannot miss that out. Let's see. Number 4. Okay. Now we get to the more better titles here. Number 4 is Princess Mononoke. Now this is a big one. I've watched that one a couple of times. And what I love about this one is it's a more mature movie. It's rated PG-13. It's not exactly for kids. The adventure in that one is amazing, and the action is very well done. The animation is amazing to watch, and also the English dub had a bit of an interesting fact. What not many people realize, that the English dub that was written to take the Japanese language and make it into an English dub and write it down, going like, here, this is what you should say in this line. And the incredible writer that did the English dub for Princess Mononoke is Neil Gaiman. That's right. You heard me right. It's, swear to God, I read it online, and it says Neil Gaiman helped out developing the English dub for Princess Mononoke, which is amazing because he did a fantastic job for doing the English dub, and I'm super happy about it. However, as I was a kid, I've only watched it one time, and I did not like it because it was a bit terrifying to watch as a kid. But when I got older and I watched it again, oh my gosh, I love that movie so much. It is now being listed as my number 4 in my list. And number 3, which I'm certain it might disappoint some of the fans out there, number 3 is Spirited Away. That is right. That is my number 3 in my list. Spirited Away is such a big movie. It is so big. The box office in Japan, let's see. I know I read this online, that Spirited Away in Japan, it is so big that it was just as big and popular as the movie Titanic that came out in theaters. That's how big that movie is. That was a pretty big deal. So for Spirited Away, sadly, I never got around watching Spirited Away until I bought the Blu-ray set, and I started watching it, and I was like, oh my God. I cannot believe all the years I've watched Hayao Miyazaki films, I cannot believe I missed that movie. That is sad, because I never realized how good this movie is. And it is heartbreaking in the end and all that, but overall, wow. It is such an incredible movie. And it's got a beautiful romance. The animation is fluently beautiful. Just as beautiful as the previous movies I've watched, but oh my God, it is good. I wish I can remember the story to you guys, but it brings so much richness of fantasy world that you're stuck in, and you get to explore the main character, what she's going through, and what you're for what you're going through, you feel the same pain as she's going through, the main character. So you do feel bad that you just wish that things will get better. Now, I wish I can go back and rewatch some of these movies. Like I should have done that about a while ago, but yeah, it's been a while, a long time, and I do want to rewatch some of these movies. But it doesn't mean I'll never watch them. I just been busy on watching other things. I've been busy playing video games. I've been busy at work, all that stuff. So anyways, number 2 on the list, we got Porco Rosso. That's right. This movie is my number 2 on my list. This has been my favorite movie for quite some time. What I was blown away is the main character is voiced by none other than Michael Keaton, the voice of Batman. This is such an amazing movie. I was like, oh my god, this is like ridiculous, but I love it. A man that got cursed to become this fat old pig, and who is a World War II plane pilot, and I believe it was a World War II plane pilot. But I believe he's just a plane pilot. So it's basically a pig who is a fighter pilot wing, and just helping to rescue others that's been attacked by bounty hunters. Oh my gosh, I just so wish that they made a sequel. That would have been amazing. But man, I love that movie a lot. They should have done a sequel for it, but sadly, with Hayao Miyazaki, he's interested on exploring other movies. So I think for Porco Rosso, it didn't quite reach that limit of becoming so popular enough that they should do a sequel. But gosh, I really hope that Studio Ghibli would be interested in doing a sequel for Porco Rosso. I would love to see that. And this may surprise you guys. My number 1 favorite movie of Hayao Miyazaki goes all way back. This goes before Nausicaa, the Valley of the Wind. That's right. My number 1 favorite movie of all time, which is his very first big movie back in the day. And it's called The Castle of Cagliostro, which is none other than a famous character, which is Lupin III. The Castle of Cagliostro has been my number 1 favorite movie of all time by Hayao Miyazaki. Hayao Miyazaki has also been helping out on developing a TV show for Lupin III back in the day. And for watching this movie was also I grew up watching. It was that and My Neighbor Totoro. Those 2 movies have been a huge influence of my childhood. Without those 2 anime movies, I never would get around watching some more anime shows. I never would have gone around watching Cowboy Bebop. I would never watch Black Lagoon. I would never watch any more of the Lupin III series, or even more of the animated movies. And I would never even watch some of the more old retro game, or not retro games, some of the more retro animes, such as Dirty Pair and Cutie Honey and Burn Up, the more old school ones. And not even Attack on Titan, and also High School of the Dead and Fooly Cooly. Oh my gosh, the list goes on and on and on. Those 2 anime movies are huge of my childhood. And I love Castle of Cagliostro so much, and it makes me want to rewatch it over and over again. And in fact, as soon as I'm done with this podcast, I might consider rewatching that again. Because it is that good of a movie, and nobody knows about it. So I think people should number 1, highly recommend getting the Castle of Cagliostro to watch on DVD or Blu-ray. I believe you can still buy online of owning the Castle of Cagliostro, but I don't know if it's still available or they stopped manufacturing it. But if you can find it out there, please do, because that is my number 1 favorite movie of all time. So those are my top 10 Hayao Miyazaki films, and I'm going to have to put to a close to you guys, because it has now been about an hour long of the show. And just a little sneak peek of the 3rd episode coming up. We're going to be talking about movies based on video games. And the episode I'm writing down a list of notes here, it's still a work in progress. I got the list all done here, but we're going to be discussing more things in the future. Since I was talking about the one topic that we should discuss on... Oh, man, now I forgot now. I'm going to have to go back and re-listen to my own podcast episode. We're going to be discussing more things in the future, but that is just a little tease that we'll be discussing more in video games. It's now getting late, and it's time for me to get some rest. So this has been a show, Zap Chat. I'm your host, Zach Probst, and I hope you guys have a good day and enjoy. Just go explore things. Just watch some more anime shows, watch some movies, play some video games, have a time of your life, and not being stuck in this really sad, depressed world. Don't go there. Be happy, be good, and just have a good time. Be enjoyable. Everybody needs to have that feeling right now. Please have a good time. Have this excitement feeling, and I hope you have a good day. And until next time, I will see you in the next episode.